After a bit of faffing, they realise that the star has disappeared from the professor's jacket. What happened? Did the writers suddenly realise they were encouraging theft? At this point, Miss Price comes out with one of the most out-of-the-blue comments ever.
It's all right, Mr. Brown. I should have realized that it would be quite impossible to take an object from one world into another.
What? Okay, first, when was it ever implied before this moment that the Isle of Naboobi was in a second world? I mean, Astaroth is a sorcerer from this world. He did his experiments in this world, and the island was seen by a sailor in the 17th century. Second, if it is another world, and it is impossible to transport items between them, how did they manage to transport themselves, the bed, the bedclothes, their own clothes, and Paul's damn guide to the plot with them when they went there? After yet more pointless filler, it's revealed that there's a perfect copy of the star written in Paul's book. The book that was just in the nursery they happened to stumble upon. Words fail me. So they finally try the spell, which fails to work. At least until they turn it into another song and dance routine. That's right, ladies and gents, we've reached the next set point of this particular monstrosity. This time a bunch of household items join into the dance sequence before going on a rampage. And then it just stops. Time for a bit more plot as the postmistress turns up and tells them the kids can go and stay on the farm with the guy who brings the milk. Well, if Miss Price was known to be against taking in kids in the first place, why didn't they just go there from the start? The kids say they don't want to go because they've got a father now. That's right, after one day with this guy, they've decided they like them both enough to stay forever. That makes sense. Despite an out-of-nowhere moment where the adults decide they might be okay with this, Professor Brown realises he should really go back to London, and instead of asking for a lift on the bed, goes down to the train station, where he spends the night sleeping on a bench and waiting for the first train. Oh, and since we haven't had a set piece for a while, here's a song about how Miss Price really wanted to be alone anyway.
No one to miss if he's gone too long. No one to comfort if things go wrong. That's how I want it to be.
Finally, the Nazis land to save us from this insanity, taking out the most useless home guardsman ever in the process. I mean, seriously, the sea is over there, man. Shouldn't you be watching it? They decide Miss Price's house is the best place for their base and rapidly arrive to capture them all. Miss Price's useless memory comes into the fore again, and she can't remember the spell to turn the commanding Nazi officer into a rabbit, despite having used it 4 times in the last 24 hours. The Nazis decide they're being too much of a nuisance and decide to cart them off out the way. Conveniently at this point, Mr. Brown wakes up at the train station and sees 2 of the most easily dispatched Nazis ever cutting phone lines, and decides to go back to the house to check on everybody. Despite being able to sneak past all the patrols and get into the house, he makes such a bloody racket when he gets inside that the Nazis come to check. At first they believe it's the cat, but Mr. Brown, instead of hiding, has decided to barricade himself in a room and attract a load of attention. After taking a break for another bout of casual sexism...
Confound it, can't women ever learn to file things properly?
Mr. Brown summons up enough belief to turn himself into a rabbit and escapes. He manages to get to the museum in time to see Miss Price and the 3 kids being locked inside, making him the fastest rabbit with the best endurance of all time, and also a much better spellcaster than Miss Price, given the amount of time he'd have to stay as a rabbit to get there. And why have the Nazis headed all the way into the village to lock them in the museum, having to increase the likelihood of being discovered, when really they could have just locked her in a room upstairs? And how does Mr. Brown know that's where they are? After a useless escape attempt, Charlie suggests that Miss Price use the movement spell to use all the armour to attack the Nazis. She immediately shoots him down, but when Mr. Brown turns up a couple of minutes later and suggests the same thing, she's totally on board.
Laguna, Macoides, Tricorum, Satis, D. Look!
A breeze! And self-replicating drumsticks, run! And so we reach our final set piece of the film. Nazis with the most intermittent subtitles ever versus magically animated armour. Now hang on a minute. How much armour was stored in this tiny village's museum? Look, I know we've got a lot more history than the Americans, but seriously, we do not keep huge stockpiles of armour spanning about 500 years in tiny villages. And how on earth has she got enough control to make them all attack? She cast the spell for the first time 6 hours ago, and she hasn't had any time to practice since. Now you could argue the armour is just doing what armour does, but here we have a unit of Roundheads from the Civil War being led by a Cavalier. For those of you not familiar with the English Civil War, these two groups of people should be fighting each other. The equivalent would be a bunch of Union soldiers being led by a Confederate officer. And here we have some archers in metal armour. Where did that come from? Archers wore leather.
Good shooting, Bowman!
Yeah, you managed to miss absolutely everything. To be fair, this is a fun scene, and it's a good ending to the film, if only the rest of the film had led up to it more cleanly. Where else are you going to see armour being shot at and emptying bullets out of itself, or spitting them back at the Nazis that fired them? In reality, this is just a bunch of very small set pieces strung together, but at least it's entertaining. Oh, and look, an armoured headsman! Well known for needing chainmail and full helms, they were. So the Nazis retreat, blowing up Miss Price's workshop in the process, and the Home Guard turn up just in time to take all the credit. Not that anyone mentions the huge piles of artefacts that have been left lying around, so let's add another couple of hundred cases of theft, just to even things out. After all this, Miss Price declares that she was never cut out to be a witch, just as well given that her notes and equipment have all been destroyed, and Mr. Brown decides that he will stay, but not before signing up to the army to go and probably get killed by the Nazis. That's odd, I didn't know you got all your weapons and equipment before you even left your house. And with the Home Guard escorting him to the train station, this movie is finally over. I guess that means it's conclusion time. Rewatching this movie was a major disappointment. I really wanted to be able to tell you this is a good family-friendly movie that everyone could enjoy. But it's not. I suppose it's probably a good movie just to plonk the kids in front of while you do something else. That way you can look in on occasion and enjoy the set pieces without having to worry about the poorly constructed plot that links them all together. I wanted to tell you this is a strong female lead, but she's not. When the chips are down, she needs to be told by the sexist man exactly what she needs to do, and by the end of the movie she's given up on what she wants to become a housewife. At least the effects don't look too dated, except for Under the Sea. Below average movie, I'm afraid, and that's hard to say. Tune in next week when I'll be looking at what happens when the American entertainment industry takes a British product and remakes it to make it accessible for the American audience. What can possibly go wrong? See you next week.